Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I'm at AK Stormageddon.
And you're listening to episode 157. And this episode, we're doing a console retrospective, and we're talking about the little white box of Nintendo's Blue Ocean that went wireless and got themselves into every single home through bowling. We're talking about the Nintendo Wii. And to join us on this retrospective through Nintendo's Revolution, we are joined by, from List Off Podcast, Ryan. Ryan, thank you so much for joining us today.
Of course. Thank you both for having me. I'm super happy to be here.
We asked in several Discords, because we had started with this retrospectives of consoles specifically with guests. We had Jacob for GameCube and then Alex from Lo5 Gaming for Game Boy. And so it's like, well, let's keep the guest train rolling. It's fun to bring in a third chair for the retrospectives. And so I asked on friend of the show, Dave Jackson's Discord, hey, is anybody into the Wii? And like within seconds, he tagged you. He's like, he's doing a whole Wii thing. You gotta get him. He's got to be on. And so thank you, Dave, for the suggestion. I've been wanting to connect with Ryan for a while. I've been a fan of List Off for quite a bit of time. And so before we get into the Wii and a little bit more about this retrospective, Ryan, why don't you just tell folks quick what List Off is, a little bit about that podcast?
Sure, absolutely. And thank you for the kind words. So List Off, we used to be solely list-based, and we would create lists every week about different video game topics, top 10 soundtracks, top 10 PlayStation 4 games, etc. Now we kind of do more of a news-based. It just got very difficult for us to do the research week in and week out, and we both have families. It kind of caught up with us, but thank you, Dave, for suggesting me for this episode. I think the reason he did it is because I also do a monthly YouTube series called Weehaw, where I have rediscovered my love for the Nintendo Wii and am building a collection for it all over again and kind of documenting my process in that.
That's amazing. I love that. It's so brilliant. And we should say at the top of the show, this is the first episode where the topic was chosen by our patrons. If you are a patron at any level, we are running polls every month, starting last month, as of when we were recording, for our console retrospectives. For other retrospectives, we're probably still picking them on our own. But for the consoles, it's like Geoff and I want to talk about probably 99% of the consoles. So why wouldn't we leave it to the audience and just kind of follow that train? And so 2 picks each for us, and we have 4 picks total. Of course, the Wii is Geoff's pick, and of course it won. And if you are, we're going to plug the Patreon more later, but if you are on the Patreon, we are currently running the second one of those, and Geoff's pick is winning again with the PlayStation 2.
At the moment.
So if you would like to give me a shot at winning, please go to patreon.com/funandgamespod, and you can join the Patreon literally at $3, $5, or $10 level. Any of the levels get you the ability to vote in our polls. And also, we're working on some restructure stuff. We'll talk about more about that soon. But I guess the best thing to start with is we are, of course, talking about the Nintendo Wii, the little console that was in every home. I think one of the only consoles I went to the midnight, morning of launch, waited out. I was in college at the time, I believe. And so I just waited outside GameStop for them to open to get it. I don't think I've gotten any other console at launch, maybe one of the DS's. And it's, of course, kind of ubiquitous with gaming now, and especially casual gaming and getting new gamers into video games. And as always, I think we should talk a little bit about how we discovered the Wii and what our early days were with it. And so since I've already started to tell, so yeah, I got it at launch. I got a Wii, 1 Wiimote, a 1 nunchuck, and The Legend of Zelda Twilight Princess, all in the same day. And then I went home and literally played it for 12 hours, just swinging my arms, was exhausted. It was a workout by the end. And yeah, I've had this console since the beginning. I don't unfortunately have it anymore, but it was my go-to console, even for third-party stuff, which we'll talk about later wasn't always great. But I loved this console from the beginning. And I was, as anyone who listens to the show knows, Geoff and I are both Nintendo fanboys. And so this was the first console I remember after the N64, which I wasn't able to get at launch because of supply issues. And then the GameCube, I waited a while, as we've talked about. This was the first Nintendo console. It's I love Nintendo. I'm buying this console day one, a new Zelda day one. I don't care. I'm just buying it. Yeah, that's kind of how I came to it. I don't remember, Geoff. Did you get it at launch also?
I certainly didn't. Not out of lack of desire. This was probably the first console that I had followed its development as closely as I'd followed anything. It caught me at just the right time, and the internet was at just the right point of being able to catch up on things. I made the pun about it at the start here. I was following it back when IGN had separate sites for each console coverage. So if you wanted GameCube, you'd go gamecube.ign.com. And I would go to revolution.ign.com to find out all of the information about the console that would be the Wii that was codenamed the Revolution because of all of the changes to gaming and to the approach and everything that Nintendo was doing. I was fascinated by it. I heard about the Wiimotes, and my first thought, even before reading any further in the article, was, oh my God, that makes its own light gun. I can just have a light gun machine at home. This is incredible. I love light gun games. And I married someone who loves them even more than I do. So, that's always fun. And this was before I got a chance to actually play with it. But regardless, I remember having the whole why is it called the Wii? This is just silly. Okay, everybody doing that, whatever. It's fine. It's still exciting. I was broke. Couldn't afford it, really. I had a DS. This was in the stage of my life where I was usually a console generation behind unless I could buy it off of somebody for cheap. And that's exactly how I got my Wii. One of my friends who was an early adopter, and I remember my first experiences playing the console were at his house. He was done with his and sold it to me for $50 a couple years after it came out.
Yeah.
So
that's pretty great.
Yeah, I still have some of those digital games on my Wii U. He had World of Goo, Fluid City, Mario Brothers 3, Final Fantasy 3, Final Fantasy 6, yada yada. And also the whole idea of the virtual console was so much of what the Wii had to offer was super enticing to me, very exciting. Games were coming out that I was losing my mind over, and it took me a while before I could get one. And I managed to get most of those games, and most of them did not disappoint.
That is true. Well, Ryan, what about you? What was your earliest experience with the Wii? Did you have it at launch?
I did not get it at launch. Actually, I was kind of like Geoff. I had followed the development of the console pretty closely, and I was on the fence about it. I was in my 20s. I had to be more decisive with my money. It was a little light at the time. I wasn't sold from the development process. It did come across as potentially gimmicky, and I know that's a rep the Wii gets, wrongfully so, in my opinion. But I was sold on the marketing. I was a victim of Nintendo's brilliant marketing at the time. The whole "we would like to play" and just showing the proof of concept. All it took was me playing Wii Sports one time on someone else's, and I was like, oh, okay. I need this in my life. So it was relatively close to launch, and I had to go on a waiting list because it was so popular. I lived in Seattle at the time, and it was so popular that I went to GameStop with the hope of being able to purchase one, and I was not able to. I went on a waiting list for about 5 months until I was able to get the console. Yeah.
Wow.
Well worth the wait. Provided me years of entertainment. You highlighted the virtual console and the WiiWare as well, and it really was the first console that opened me up to this world of indies and the potential of indie games and getting them cheap. And it felt like you always had a game to choose from. Even when you didn't have the money to spend on a new big release, you could always purchase World of Goo or Defend Your Castle. And it provided hours of fun at a really reasonable price.
For sure, yeah. And while the 360 will always be like my first indie machine, even though I didn't realize it at the time, the Wii was definitely a close second. I should say that the North American release date of the Wii was November 19th, 2006, which is almost 20 years ago. It's 3 years shy of 20 years ago, which is just terrifying to me to say out loud.
It's only 2 years past 15 years old. That's fine.
It's fine. It's fine. We've all mentioned it, and it is probably the thing that sold the system, at least in the early days. But we have to talk a little bit about a little game called Wii Sports. Wii Sports was a pack-in title. It's not as common now with consoles, although the PS5 sort of had a digital version of this. But consoles back in the day for many years would come with a pack-in title. Not always at launch. Some Nintendo consoles didn't at launch and then later got a re-release that came with, famously, the Super Nintendo and Mario World. But the Wii came with Wii Sports, this tech demo of sports games that showed you really how to use the controller and really gave you a lesson in all the different ways to use it. I don't want to say that this is the reason the console sold well, because I think it was many things.
I will.
I think the reason this console sold well, especially to families that never played games before, is because Wii Sports was so approachable. And like to this day, I haven't played it in a while. It's been several years, but like anytime I'm at a friend's house and they break out Wii Sports, I still want to play it. Like it's just so simple in execution, but difficult to master in how you learn how to play these games. But it's probably one of the most brilliant things Nintendo has ever done, not only with a pack-in title, but how to sell a console.
I would call it second only to packing in Tetris with Game Boy.
Oh, that's
Correct,
true.
yeah. Yeah.
Because what it was doing was something similar, but on a vastly different scale. What Tetris did was sell the idea of handheld gaming to people that had never done it before. They did it with a very tried and tested addictive puzzler. Tetris had been around for a number of years before that, but putting it on the Game Boy made it definitive in so many ways. And that idea of the short, almost arcade-like experiences we talked about in our Game Boy retrospective helped sell the idea of the system, and also to people who didn't care about Mario or video game bleep bloop, whatever. What the Wii had to sell was the notion of motion control. And you know, that is used by everything nowadays. It's not. And it wasn't before that. So having to get that concept into people's hands and into people's heads, and it's something that is both intuitively simple yet debilitatingly complex. And so to try to sell a huge adventure, to try to do a big puzzle game, none of that would work. So to have something where everybody understood sports, and that is actually very much early Nintendo as well. Most early Nintendo Famicom, early video game consoles would usually have sports titles as sort of a, hey everybody, you know how baseball works? Well, here's baseball on your TV that you can play with a controller.
Oh, Pong and tennis, you know?
Pong and tennis. Yeah. Tennis games were honestly the big tried and true test on that one. And if you look it up, it's incredible. I've been watching a lot of Jeremy Parish's work, and it really opened my eyes to that. Now I can't unsee it. But the same thing of like Wii bowling. Everybody intuitively knows how to bowl. Whether you're good at it or not, everybody intuitively knows how to bowl. So hold controller, swing like I'm bowling. Don't throw it at the TV. Most folks intuitively know past a certain age, don't throw things at the TV as well. So this covers a lot of intuitive ground. It adds a nice multiplayer. There's the goofiness of the Mii. There's lots of little things going on there that allow for a breaking down of all of the aspects of this whole play experience that would seem daunting or too complex for even regular gamers of the time. It also got everyone else involved, which made it easier to get into your house. So it was truly a tour de force of an idea, and it seems obvious in hindsight, but its brilliance can't be overstated.
Absolutely. Just to piggyback off that, I loved your guys' Game Boy episode.
Thank
and
you.
If you haven't seen the Tetris movie, it is pretty riveting. It's on Apple TV Plus. I'll go ahead and give that a shout out.
I've only watched the trailer, and I keep forgetting it exists, and every time I remember, I'm mad at myself.
It's good. It's worth a watch.
It looks
for sure.
really good.
Yeah. I will say, you say motion controls are not everywhere, but it wasn't until I revisited the Wii in 2023. I'm a VR aficionado. I had a MetaQuest 2. I have a PSVR 2. And it's funny now going back to the Wii, it's like, oh, wait a minute. This is like a precursor to the same controls you use in VR nowadays.
That's fair. Yeah. The PlayStation Move controllers are used for PlayStation VR,
absolutely,
the original.
Absolutely. Also, just to piggyback off what you were saying about not throwing controllers at the TV, This was very much the era of broken TV videos on YouTube from the Nintendo Wiimotes.
Just because you know you weren't supposed to doesn't mean it didn't happen.
Right.
That's the human experience.
Yeah, use those wrist straps. Use those wrist straps, kids.
They put the warnings in. Did we listen to the warnings? I don't know. I never read that FBI thing on VHS tapes.
No. Fast forward through that part for sure. But Wii Sports, as you mentioned, it was just intuitive. Everybody knew how to pick up and play. It had that mass appeal. People played Wii Sports for different reasons. I know people who still have a Wii, and the one game they still have for it is Wii Sports because they just like golf. You know, They just like the version of golf. Is it a 1-to-1? Is it directly like playing a round of golf? Not at all. But they're good at the Wii Sports version and not at the real one. That goes for bowling as well. I am not a good bowler, but Wii Sports made me feel like I could be a good bowler. It's almost like that sense of empowerment that you get from video games, right? A lot of video games are based on making you feel like you can be the hero. And it was
Mhm.
a sports game that made you feel like you could be good at sports even if you weren't. And that went a long way with a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, the Wii also, I think what's key to Wii Sports' success is it also continued an ethos that they're starting to sunset now, but like from the N64 on, multiplayer was inherent. The N64 had 4 ports, the GameCube had 4 ports, and the Wii still had 4 GameCube ports and could support up to 4 Wiimotes. And this game out of the box let you play with more than 2 people. Some games let you play with many more people. I think up to 4 players on both bowling and golf. And then I think you could take turns. I know the others were just one-on-one. But like that ethos also really, I think, boosted this game because not only was it something that you could bring into the home that people may not have experienced video games before, but then you can also invite all your friends over. A thing that I miss desperately. And while I love the Switch and I love playing it handheld all the time, it is a more isolating console unless 4 of us are all playing our Switches together in the same room, which I've done as well and is wonderful. But it's a different experience than all sharing the experience on the TV in front of you. And I agree. Like, I was never a sports person. I liked basketball well enough and played decently growing up, but like, I was never really a sports person. I hadn't bowled regularly since I was on a league when I was like 9. And so playing this version of these sports, I was like, oh, I understand how to do this. I'm actually kind of good at this and like would actually trash talk at this in a way that like I was terrible at other sports games. Like the Maddens and whatever else I liked trying, but I was never any good at.
And also, the Wiimote taps into something that a lot of us intuitively do. The idea of you pick up the Wiimote and you can swing it and it's a tennis racket or a baseball bat. How many of us haven't walked around when we were kids and picked up a stick and imagined it was 1,000 different things? And to have an object in your hand to swing around, you hold onto a flashlight and it's a lightsaber now. Any of these ideas, any of these concepts, it's a magic wand, it's a gun, it's a sword, it's a piece of sporting equipment, it is a lasso, it is everything because you're only limited by your imagination. And that was the promise of the Nintendo Wii and the motion controls that it gave us and what Wii Sports sort of whet our appetites for.
And just in case your imagination was lacking, you had a peripheral you could add to the end of the Wiimote that would make it look like any one of those things.
Absolutely. I still have a couple of the driving wheels for Mario Kart Wii, and I insist on driving with motion controls, even though by and large, they're probably the worst way to control in Mario Kart Wii. I don't care. I'm not playing to win. I'm playing to vroom vroom drive, and that is the best way for me to do so. Also, it's just very fun. It just feels good in my hands, you know?
The tech was so impressive in the early Wiimotes that the peripheral wheel was plastic. Like there was no electronics in it. You slid it in. It had a lever that would press down. The B button was on the back. But
Yes.
besides that, like there was no electronics in the wheel itself. You just turned it and it did the thing.
Most of the peripherals were like that.
Right. Yeah. Where they just let you hold it a different way. But the Wiimote itself did all the work. And like eventually they released Wii Motion Plus, which only improved it. But like the early stuff like Wii Sports and Mario Kart and a few others, you didn't really need that much enhancement. It did the job pretty well. Even swinging the sword in Twilight Princess, it was not perfect. It was not one-to-one, but you swung the Wiimote and Link swung the sword. Like it was just that kind of one-to-one. And it was like, I will admit that I was the kind of person who prefers Link when I can just control him and press a button to swing the sword, but I was in the minority at the time for sure, because most people were so giddy. And I will admit that like some of the bow and arrow stuff and other things that the Wiimote was just inherently made for, the light gun stuff, I don't know if it's my favorite controller. It's probably not, but it's definitely one of the most impressive controllers that Nintendo has ever made, because it's just so outside the box for what anyone was doing at that time.
And it's so easy to not see it that way because of how many Wiis were sold and how many Wiimotes ended up in people's homes. And we just sort of took it for granted after a while.
There were so many games that got gimmicky too. There was a lot
Also
of
true.
shovelware, which I think brought the tech down a notch. But just to shout out Twilight Princess, it has come up twice. Link's right-handed in Twilight Princess, and it's actually mirrored. So if you played most Legend of Zelda games, Link is left-handed. And if
Yep.
you go back and play the GameCube version of the game, it's totally different from playing the Wii version. So I just had to shout that out real quick. I thought that was a pretty neat solution, knowing most people would be predominantly right-handed and play the game.
Yeah. Was it a perfect solution? No, but it was a really, really smart one for saving costs and getting a latter-day GameCube title as a launch title for your new system.
Yeah. Ryan makes a good point. For every great game on the Wii, there was also probably 3 pieces of shovelware. And in the beginning, it was really hard to tell because in the early days, besides Wii Sports and Twilight Princess, there was a lot of third-party stuff or strange random stuff like Excite Truck. Excite Bike came back as a franchise as Excite Truck, which was not great. But then you have games that, like, I don't know that I would have ever played if it weren't on the Wii, like Trauma Center, which was a franchise that existed on the DS, but its only real console version is on this, and it's by Atlas. It's one of their lesser known games because it was so exclusive to Nintendo specifically. But like, I loved this ridiculously stupid game, and it was stupid in the best way. Like, the story made no sense. It was like this weird, like, sometimes there's aliens, poison, who knows what else. But like, the ability to do simulated pseudo surgery with the Wiimote and the pointer and the different buttons, it was bizarre in the best way.
Oh, absolutely. There's actually a sequel to that game too. Very unique titles. You're right. I think a lot of people do focus on the shovelware, and I think the Wii just gets a really bad reputation of not aging well. And I'm personally finding that there's a lot to love there. Time is allowing the cream to rise to the top. And a game like Trauma Center is a perfectly good example of how the tech allowed something that is an experience you wouldn't get anywhere else.
Yeah. The notion of how the Wiimote worked allowed for a minor resurgence of a nascent genre, the point-and-click adventure. Because you
Yeah.
were able to use the Wiimote as a pointer as well, because, I mean, that's how it picked things up sometimes. And so you had things like Sam and Max coming back. You had Strong Bad's Cool Game for Attractive People.
Yep.
If I remember correctly, Zack and Wiki also had a little bit of point-and-click to it as
It
well,
did.
Quest for Barbarous Treasure. Yeah, the march of time has been interesting for the Nintendo Wii because, yeah, good memories allow for the cream to rise to the top, and you forget a lot of the shovelware, except for the fact that if you're at all a video game collector, you go anywhere there's Wii titles, I'll look through them, but I feel usually pretty confident that I'm not going to find any treasures there. The scale between the good stuff and the shovelware feels, I think, biggest for the Nintendo Wii. It may not be, but it feels like it.
That's fair. I mean, I've definitely gone out a lot in the last year. I was gifted the Wii again in 2023. That's what spawned WiiHaw and my adventures in collecting. And you do find treasure when you go to retro gaming stores looking to pick up a good title.
Always, yeah.
But I will agree that the vast majority of the games sitting on those shelves is like 5 copies of Carnival games.
Yes, it's those mini game collections that are just, you ain't Wii Sports, buddy.
Yeah. I don't even know if they really put effort into it, but there are so many of them. And in comparison, you'll usually find 1 or 2 good titles that are worth picking up. Zack and Wiki is a great example of that, but it's far outweighed by the bad.
And before we dive deep into the good, I think to get it out of the way, like the third-party stuff, especially the licensed stuff, is where the biggest shovelware shined. I mean, my greatest example is I remember being so excited for a Transformers game to be coming out after the new movie, and like you could play as Bumblebee, and it looked so cool. But what I didn't know, and this is a common problem even now, is that Nintendo didn't always show it playing on the Wii. They would often use whatever stock footage the developer was providing, or sometimes, I don't know whether it was intentional or not to choose that, but they would be showing the Xbox 360 version, especially later on. And I just remember like seeing one of the Transformers games or something else, being excited to play it, going to buy the Wii version because that's what I had at the time. I didn't have a 360 at launch, and then getting home and playing whatever that was. It happened most egregiously with Sonic Unleashed. I'm an old school Sonic fan. I've been playing Sonic on Nintendo since the GameCube. You know, that's the first time I ever played Sonic Adventure. And so I was like, all right, I'll buy Sonic Unleashed on the Wii. And famously, it is an atrocious version. But it's not unplayable. That's the thing. Graphically, it was inferior, but it still ran. I know folks who grew up with the Wii who didn't have the other consoles of that generation who cherished those ports because that's the version they had. They didn't have other versions.
And they could get really unique with those versions as well because the Nintendo Wii was also a break point of Nintendo pulling away from trying to compete with everybody else at their game, as it were, where the GameCube, Xbox, and PS2 felt very much neck and neck with each other in so many ways at so many times. The very nature of what the Wii was, how the Wiimote was constructed and played, and motion controls filling in for a lot of gaps. Even throwing on the nunchuck accessory, you had only one analog stick versus the two on your PS3 and your Xbox 360. They had to go in a different direction for all those designs. And so always was kind of an interesting, for a given value of interesting, proposition to see how various third-party titles would be adapted to the Wii. I remember one of the first games that I saw was another game that I was following fervently, Marvel Ultimate Alliance, because I was a huge X-Men Legends fan. And I don't know, it was just the perfect storm of the timing and everything, and I was super excited for Marvel Ultimate Alliance. I don't talk about it much nowadays, but I do remember the hype. And seeing how on the Wii, it controlled a lot with motion controls. That was actually the game that I saw at my friend's house, the one who sold me his old Wii, and he's a dyed-in-the-wool Spider-Man fan. And so getting to watch him do the move where you catch an enemy in your web and you get to swing them around by swinging the Wiimote around, I thought that was just danged incredible. Now, those sorts of things get exhausting over time, and there's reasons why some Wii motion controls are cherished and remembered fondly, and others are just exhausting. But it is a part of history, and it is worth remarking on.
Yeah, I mean, I will say really quick, though it was untenable to play it for a long period of time, and while the majority of the game was trash on the Wii, Spider-Man 3 on the Wii, the web slinging by using the nunchuck and the Wiimote, like your web swinging, was incredible. Before we got Spider-Man on PS4, like, that was the coolest immersion for Spider-Man web swinging I'd ever seen. Of course, trying to play literally any other part of that game on the Wii was impossible, but that part was still really cool. All that to say, like, the console did some really brilliant stuff with the Wiimote also, especially in its first-party titles.
Yeah, I think it's really about implementation. So many games, it almost felt forced, like they had to have that motion control in there. And an example that stands out for me is Indiana Jones and the Staff of Kings. It's a good adventure game, but the combat bogs everything down because it just doesn't work. Every combat encounter, you need to use motion controls, and it's not accurate. And it's funny how you could take what would have been a good game, but now, oh, it's the Wii, we have to have motion controls. Like, we have to put this in our game, and somehow not think of it as an option. It's funny that you could have something that would normally be a wonderful experience, and it just can't be that because it had to have motion controls.
It felt a lot like the handheld contemporary, the Nintendo DS, where a lot of early DS titles felt very try-hard on implementing the second screen and it being a touch screen. Castlevania Dawn of Sorrow, the first DS title, is nearly a perfect Metroidvania, almost the best Castlevania game, except for the fact that it was an early release, and in order to justify being on the DS, there were touchscreen pieces. You had to draw sigils at the end of boss battles to seal them in order for them to die. It wasn't fun, it wasn't good, and it added nothing.
But Portrait of Ruin was great.
Portrait of Ruin was incredible. Order of Ecclesia is an unsung classic.
I mean, but also some of the most definitive versions of certain games are on this console. Famously, we are in the year of the remake, and one of the biggest ones this year was RE4, a version I've not played yet. I love the original. I only played it a few years ago, and I'm excited to play remake. But one of the most definitive versions of Resident Evil 4 is actually on the Wii. Everyone I know who's played multiple versions of the game, including the Wii version, say it's some of the best shooting controls they've ever experienced.
Resident Evil had a lot of bangers on the Wii. It's so weird.
Yeah, because also the Revelations titles, I believe, started on the Wii as well. And then when Metroid Prime 3 Corruption came out on the Wii, they also re-released the first two games on the Wii with Wiimote control. And everyone I know who's played both versions also say that for the most part, the Wiimote versions of the Metroid Prime franchise is some of the most fun that series is. And like, that's always so astonishing to me. As someone who only sort of liked motion controls and kind of often just wanted to sit on his ass and play a game, the incorporation that Nintendo would do to their first party titles, or the major publishers who would really lean into it, like Capcom, who leaned into it for a lot of their titles, really like showed that stuff to shine. And like, even though it didn't have the power of other consoles, it got to do some really cool and interesting stuff. And some of these versions of these games are trapped on the Wii. Like, the Switch can sort of do the same thing that we can, but not quite the same way. And so it's not a one-to-one port.
Yeah, I think the Revelations games were on the DS. I will say that.
Oh,
but
yes,
they had
yes,
the
yes.
Chronicles games on the Wii.
Those are the ones.
which
And
is-
those had no business being that good.
They were great. And that also is a whole genre that the Wii was perfect for, which is rail shooters. Like you said, Geoff, it was a light gun. Wait a minute, this controller's a light gun. And there was so many rail shooters available for the console that highlighted how good it could be. House of the Dead had remakes on it and an original game, Overkill. There was the Resident Evil Chronicles games, Ghost Squad. A lot of games saw the potential there and took advantage of it. Dead Space Extraction is a really
That's
good one.
right.
Yeah, really.
Yes.
Good story tie-in to the original Dead Space in that too. It's a whole genre that I think the Wii just nailed.
I think the biggest heartbreak for me as a Wii owner is that towards the end of its life cycle, I was tired of it. You know, I'd gotten a 360. I started playing some PC games. Like, I was seeing the best games on the Wii still were graphically inferior. And at the time, it bummed me out. To this day, I regret. I'm a Wario Land sicko. Everyone who listens to this podcast knows Wario
About
Land.
to bring this up.
Like, and like, I've played every Wario Land game except one, and it is impossible to play anywhere else. And that's Wario Land Shake It, a game that I've now watched other people play. And like, it had animated cutscenes by the same studio who does the Shantae cutscenes. Like, it is, I've been told, one of the best Wario Land games that was just underserved because it came out so late and it wasn't really promoted. Nintendo didn't really get behind it in the same way they didn't really get behind Wario World, which kind of failed on the GameCube as well. And it's a bummer to me. That's the kind of stuff that drives me crazy about the Wii, is that it's got some of the coolest games that I've still yet to ever play because they haven't been available anywhere else and they're so specific to this console.
If you do want to collect for the Nintendo Wii, one of the reasons I started doing it is that it's relatively cheap compared to other consoles, especially retro consoles. I mean,
Yes.
you could get a Wii at a very reasonable price, and I think Wario Land Shake It goes for about $20 to $25. Most games you'll be able to get for that much. There are some, more expensive titles out there, but for the most part, you're looking at under $100 with most games well under that mark.
I've considered it. Geoff knows I've dabbled in collecting, but I'm trying not to overdo it just because I don't really have the space for it. I know a friend of the show, Jacob, is actually starting to collect for the Wii U for the same reason, right? Although those games are a little rarer than the Wii. I think that what makes me most nostalgic for this console is the fact that, again, it's the first one that I waited in line to buy and I got the day it came out. But also, there are some games that only exist on this console that nobody talks about, like Mad World, a game that if you didn't own a Wii, you had no idea what it was. It was in the vein of No More Heroes, which also was kind of locked to that console for a long time.
For a very long time, yeah.
But Mad World is a Suda51 game that is released by Sega. The lead character, who wields a chainsaw, voiced by Stephen Bloom, and it's in black and white. It was stylized like Sin City. This was literally all my buzzwords in 2009. You're in this like gladiator arena. The commentator is voiced by Greg Proops. Like, such bizarre, very Suda vibe that I ate up, and it made me a Suda fan. It made me go back and play No More Heroes and play No More Heroes 2. Both games, which I never finished and now own on Switch and have still yet to finish, but will eventually. And Ryan's holding up a copy on the video of
Sealed.
Mad World. Like, it's just like, that's what I love about this console. And I feel like it has more than other consoles of that generation or even at all. These diamonds in the rough that, like, if you didn't own this console, you never even heard of or knew it existed.
Well, this has made me realize, looking through my own database and everything, I don't have a copy of Mad World. I have Sin and Punishment, Star Successor.
Ooh, that's another one.
That's also a good one.
The first game in that series was Japan only on the N64, and I believe it is now on the Switch Online. Or it was available on Virtual Console, if I'm not mistaken, I think is the way that people were able to play it. But, yeah, there were so many of these sorts of games that, yeah, if you didn't know any better, and especially because the Wii, with its family-friendly branding and ideals, was not great for shaking off the family-friendly kiddie image that the GameCube had. despite other mature titles on there as well. And so it's easy for diamonds in the rough like that to get caught under preconceived notions of what was available on the console and what is available if you just look around a little more. And I feel bad because, Mad World is one of those games that I usually find on shelves that's usually it's a good game. I have it already. And I don't know why I kept thinking that. So this has been a great conversation, if only for that.
Mad World's a good example. Like you said, it was the kiddie image of Nintendo. There was Silent Hill Shattered Memories, which is another good one. Cursed Mountain was one of them. And there was actually like a lot of good survival horror available for the console, but everybody sees Mario, they see Super Paper Mario, they see Mario Kart, and
the House of the Dead games were brutal.
Oh, absolutely. With like adult language and everything. And not to say like those first party titles don't deserve the recognition they get. They absolutely do. But there was a lot there if you were looking for a more adult experience outside.
There's a more detailed tapestry.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've also gone a while without talking about a lot of the first-party titles of the flagship characters. I mentioned Metroid Prime in that franchise. This was like Metroid's console revival, essentially, this and the GameCube, but also like has two of the widely regarded best Mario games ever made, Mario Galaxy 1 and 2, though folks tend to lean towards Galaxy 1 more. It was always a joke, especially at this time in the 2000s, where it's like, what do you do with a franchise when you have nothing left to do? You go to space. And like, they literally did that with Mario. And it was literally one of the best games they ever made. And I still remember the first time as Mario, you launched yourself in the star by flicking the Wiimote and you just soared through space. Like, I teared up as a kid. Like, I was like, how is this real? You know? It's one of those things that I think it's easy to forget that while people want to focus on the shovelware or the bad third party, the first party titles on this console are still being re-released in places because there's some of the best in these characters' franchises.
And I also want to point out that Mario Galaxy does something that a few other titles do. And you still see it sometimes, but I first noticed it on the Wii. It's had so many different names, or not even named anything, but it's basically little sibling mode.
Yes.
Where you have two-player mode on Mario Galaxy, but the second player isn't controlling Mario or Luigi or whoever's running around on screen. No, you are pointing the Wiimote at the screen, and a little pointer pops up, and you can pick up all of the star bits while it's flying around. I got to do that a little bit while Sarah played through Mario Galaxy before I played it myself, and you get that a little bit as well, all the way up to Mario Odyssey with the second Joy-Con controlling Cappy. Those ideas of if Nintendo Wii is giving you, we would like to play, inclusivity, family can play, no matter your skill level or anything like that, having a mode where, I call it little sibling mode, but it could also be grandparent mode. It could be first time playing, no matter what it is. You're getting involved in the game. You're getting to see it. You're getting to enjoy the admittedly still joyous spectacle to this day. Hopping between planets in Mario Galaxy is so fun and looks so cool. It doesn't have the same HD pop, shine, whatever, but it's still a great spectacle. And having any amount of participation in that draws you in all the further. Again, I also alluded to at the very top of the episode, Blue Ocean, which was a strategy that Nintendo was implementing at the time with the DS and with the Wii. I don't think they coined the term. I definitely don't think so. I am not a business major or anything like that. But that idea of large open space, lots out there, lots of potential customers, lots of potential players. I've probably even screwed up the idea of the Blue Ocean concept, but I have not misnamed it.
I definitely think the little microgravity of the planets too in Galaxy was very cool to experience. I will say those interactive kind of casual second player things slowly degraded or quickly degraded when you started playing new Super Mario Brothers Wii, and it would just turn into a big wrestling match where you're trying to throw your friends down chasms and promise not to pop their bubble when they get revived. But that was also a very fun experience to make a classic 2D Mario game a little more competitive.
Which was the first new Super Mario Brothers that had Nabbit? Was it Wii or was it Wii U?
I'm not sure.
I think it was Wii U. I don't believe Nabbit was in Wii.
Because that was also an evolution on the still participating but having an easier time of it. Your funky mode.
Yeah,
as it were.
exactly.
Yeah.
Because also the Wii was where Donkey Kong Country returned.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the first non-rare side-scrolling Donkey Kong game. What's a bummer about that coming out towards the tail end of the life cycle of the Wii is that when Tropical Freeze came out on the Wii U, and not a lot of folks have bought that either, I just felt like that series, while lauded, didn't get to shine the way it could have. Thankfully, Tropical Freeze has been re-released on the Nintendo Switch, and then also Returns got ported to the 3DS, which was the version I had. But like, those Donkey Kong games are some of the best side-scrolling platformers ever made. I will argue that Tropical Freeze is probably one of the best Donkey Kong games ever made, and I love the original classic Donkey Kong Country. Sonic broke new ground, not necessarily in a good way, but like the Storybook series, which is supposed to be like 3 or 4 games, ended up only being 2, The Black Knight and Secret Rings, which was like Aladdin and then King Arthur. They were interesting. They weren't by any means good, but they were interesting. They were different. Nintendo took a lot of risks, and like some of those risks paid off in the partners that they teamed with. I think about Just Dance.
Oh, yeah.
Like, this is such an anomaly. So Just Dance probably arguably was most popular on the Wii. And the thing about Just Dance that's really fascinating is that they continued to release it every year all the way till 2020. Just Dance 2020 is the last game to come out on the Wii, a console that wasn't printing games regularly for the better part of 5 or 6 years at that point, maybe more. But they still kept releasing that game because the folks who loved that franchise still had that console. I think they may have been coming out on the Wii U as well, and I know they were coming out on the Switch as we got closer, but like, that's still fascinating to me that I can't think of another console where that has happened specifically, where a major publisher is still releasing one of their franchises on that console so long after its life cycle had ended.
The other one I can think of is a similar but different kind of thing where whether it was a dance game or we're back to sports. I believe the last PS2 game that was ever printed as in an official way is Pro Evolution Soccer 2014, released in tail end of 2013 on a console that was released in, 2000? 2001?
Yeah.
2000. And had long since been lapped by, I believe the PS4 was out at that point.
Yeah.
Just Dance did start like its own genre for the Wii, though. You had like the Michael Jackson Experience and all these dance titles that came out surrounding the success of Just Dance. Not to mention, this was the era of rhythm games like Guitar Hero and Rock Band, and those were good on any console, but also present on the Wii.
Mm-hmm. The Wii existed at a very interesting point in several game development arcs, where it was there for the sunsetting and pulling away of some genres. I believe the sort of plastic instrument boom, it didn't crash, but it started fading around that point. I remember when DJ Hero came out, and it's a good game, but there was a lot against it. And you really are buying a big sort of turntable for 1 or 2 games at that, which was really what kind of killed those big plastic accessories, which all of these just holding the Wiimote differently accessories were buying into as well. It was the rise of a lot of indie title ideas. It was a rise on a lot of those. And it was also not just Rock Band and things like that, but a lot of rhythm games. The shine from Dance Dance Revolution and everything else was starting to come down a little bit. And it didn't mean that they were all dead forever. But I did kind of say flippantly at the beginning here that motion controls aren't really used anymore, but I'm wrong. They are still used, plenty. But they're not used the way that the Wii used them, because a lot of folks were trying to shoehorn things in, and a lot of fantastic titles on the Wii that never used motion control to any great extent are sort of forgotten because of the flash, the novelty and idea, and the inherent silliness, because it's fun and play of the extremes of the Wiimote's controls.
Yeah, for sure. I think also something that we hinted at earlier that we should spend some time talking about before we get into some favorites is the WiiWare, and more specifically, the Virtual Console. Because the Virtual Console was pretty much the start of something that is like commonplace now, which is this re-release of previous libraries on an existing piece of hardware. The Xbox 360 dabbled with it, re-releasing some older PlayStation games and some other stuff to the Xbox Live Arcade, as well as did the PlayStation 3 dabble with it a tiny bit.
With the PS1 classics, yeah.
Right, but the Nintendo Wii, you could buy Nintendo, Super Nintendo game. Like I owned at that time several copies of Super Mario RPG because you could have it on the Wii, you could have the physical cartridge. I remember some of my favorite Super Nintendo games. They were just all on my home screen. Super Castlevania, Super Metroid. You could buy all of them. And looking at it now, it was pricey and we were paying a lot of money for games. But I think also comparatively, it was one of the best ways to get those old games. And some games that were never released really anywhere else also would come to the virtual console. It's like, here's North America's first experience with this Nintendo game on this console, especially as we went to the Wii U, which I think that's where Earthbound Beginnings was. It was either there or...
Yes.
Yeah. We had N64 also
Yeah.
on
That's the
the
first
Wii
time
as well,
I played
right?
Sin and Punishment, actually. I think it was the first time it was in North America.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's true. And it also was giving us TurboGrafx 16
Yeah,
games,
that's
the
right.
Sega Genesis
That's right.
titles too.
Yeah. It was just wild to me that we could access all this stuff and I would have this one console with all of these classic games. And it really echoes something we talked about in our Vim episode about how pathetic a lot of the games porting and access is, because even when we could buy them here, there was so many of them that now are just not available since the service has been shut down.
And even worse than the virtual console titles, which are a great tragedy, there were several WiiWare titles where that was the only way you were able to play it. And not just because an indie developer put all their eggs in that seemingly bountiful basket. The one that leaps to mind for me was they also did some WiiWare remakes of older games. And the one that I think most folks know about is they did a remake of the first Castlevania game for the Game Boy, Castlevania Adventure. And Castlevania Adventure, well, the sequel was good. It's a good way to put it. It learned from the mistakes of the first one. I never got to play the WiiWare remake, but I've heard nothing but glowing things about it. And it really sucks. It just sucks that there's not an easy way to get at it. And I don't know if, because the amount of times that companies have lost gold discs or go, yeah, well, we own the rights to that, but we have no way of giving it to you. Don't pirate it. Exist out there. I don't know how anyone's ever going to get to play it again. And I think it should be preserved. That's kind of the dark side of that. But the Nintendo Wii being the first Nintendo console that used a full-sized disc, not a mini disc, not anything else, a disc. It tried something interesting that has evolved and continued and sustained, and I think does have value in preserving its backlog and making it accessible on whatever the latest piece of tech is. And yeah, the idea of having the Nintendo Wii, if for a lot of people that was their first console or that was their first time back in a long time, the virtual console was a great way to make that one piece of tech that you bought a gateway into a lot of old and new memories.
I'm just going to go ahead and say pirate it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But,
No. If
yeah,
you have
absolutely.
to, you have to.
But I do want to highlight that it's a big complaint I hear now about NSO, right? About the Nintendo Switch Online, is that it's not that a la carte kind of format that the virtual console had. You can't just pick the game you want from this bevy of a catalog. You have to get what they put out there on NSO, and you don't have a choice in which games you purchase and what those games are. It's a nice effort. Like, I think the NSO is a pretty good bang for your buck, right?
I see good and bad in both of them because there's plenty of games on there that I've tried out that I would not have bought,
Right.
but it gets me trying them. But you're right. They were releasing a lot more games when it was a marketplace.
Yeah. And it lets you choose. But as you mentioned, you wouldn't be exposed to certain games because you would never choose them.
Yeah.
It's a balancing act. Always is.
And I think with the WiiWare specifically, it's just such a fraction of games are still available elsewhere. Like the Strong Bad games, I'm pretty sure are. The Sam and Max games are. Mega Man 9 and 10 are available elsewhere. But most of the smaller titles or the indie titles just don't exist anywhere but there and are gone. Same problem with the DS shop and the 3DS shop that just recently closed.
Wii U
and the
shop.
Wii U. It's all of these digital marketplaces shutting down. Like, look, I think we're at the point now where they're finally shutting down Xbox Live, which, like, I will give Xbox credit where credit's due. They kept that service environment available so much longer than anyone else has. And there's so many games on that as well. And like anything else, if you have these things downloaded and you keep the console, you can still access them. But like there's no way to get to them otherwise. And there are people selling like fully loaded consoles online. You can of course pirate it, and there are other ways to mod your systems and hack them. But like it still baffles me that when we went to the Switch, that we didn't just move the virtual console over. It just doesn't make sense. Other than infrastructure, there was no reason to not keep that moving. It just seemed like such a natural evolution because it went from the Wii to the Wii U that it would go to the Switch. And when it didn't, it just boggled my mind.
I think it's just this progression we're seeing of things wanting to go to subscription based. They want to keep getting your money, but I can't believe that they are making more money off of NSO than they would be off the virtual console.
Yeah.
I don't know their market research or how much folks who have a Wii U, and a Switch, like myself, would be willing to pay a fee again, even if it's $4.99 each time for an NES title. Those add up.
I'm buying Super Mario Brothers 3 again. I'll buy it 10 more times. I'm a sucker.
I own it way too many different ways.
Before we start to wind down, I think some things that we should talk about, for one, before we get to our favorite games, is some of the most bizarre peripherals we've ever seen for this console. Because the thing that this console, I think, has above the others that we've talked about, we did talk about some pretty weird peripherals with the Game Boy. They had some bizarro stuff. But like something that Ryan alluded to very early on is like all of the sports titles had peripherals, but they didn't do anything. They literally were attached to the top of the controller to make it look like a bat, a tennis racket, whatever, but it didn't do anything. It was all plastic bits with almost no electronics in them. The variety of light guns that you could get, the Wiimote just slotted into it. Maybe there were levers to hit a button, but there were no actual electronics in them. I think there were a few light guns that actually looked like some kind of gun, not really in the States, but I think overseas. And like,
Yes.
that stuff still blows my mind that they existed.
Yeah, House of the Dead Overkill had a very realistic looking revolver peripheral. That was still essentially
Yes.
put the Wiimote in the barrel, off you go. But that one you had to import because of gun laws and things like that. But there were some ones here and there, and I've got mine. And look, I know it's just a piece of plastic, and pulling the trigger just pushes the button on the Wii. That's all it is. It's mechanical, not electronic. It still feels fun.
Some of them do feel fun, but lots of them are cheap plastic. It was almost like its own little economy. And everybody wanted to like, hey, let's play Wii Sports with little tennis rackets on the ends of our Wiimote that don't do anything. But like, I remember still wanting to get those peripherals. Why? Why? Because I'm a consumer.
Yes, and how. A little while ago, played Mario Kart with my oldest nephew and my niece, and they don't play a ton of video games. And so the idea of what do they play, what can they play, they wanted to play our video games. And so it's like, all right, Mario Kart Wii, that's perfect. And it's honestly our go-to Mario Kart when we play with people. Yes, 64 has a special place in our heart. And yes, everything on the Switch is awesome. But Mario Kart Wii is great for accessibility for new and old and young and anybody. And so having those steering wheels was great. Put them in the hands of the kids. You had a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old there who didn't really play a lot of video games. They also would just like kind of turn away from the TV and just hold the steering wheel in one hand and wonder why they were losing. You know what? I can't help that. I can give them the steering wheels, and they were very excited about that. So I'll say it was a win.
The first thing I thought holding a Wiimote was, this is a lightsaber, because that's my brain. That's the first thing I thought. And the fact that we got the glow swords, which were basically lightsabers, that like when you turn the Wiimote on, it would glow red, blue, green, or orange. Like the Force Unleashed game was not great, and you never really felt like you were using a lightsaber in the way that you might later on with some of the Kinect stuff, but then you weren't holding anything. Mm-hmm. The fact that it looked like a lightsaber and I could literally swing it around and go woo, woo, zoo. Like, I only found out very recently that apparently Liam Neeson made the lightsaber sounds, and they had to tell him not to.
Ewan McGregor.
When they were filming. Oh, it was Ewan McGregor making them. That's right. And like they had to tell him not to. But like, how could you not, right? It's the same way like Chris Pratt talked about as Star-Lord making the gun sounds. It's like, it's so inherent and natural.
You can clearly see Laura Dern in The Last Jedi saying pew pew during a very dramatic scene when she's firing her blaster. And I will not judge her for it.
No, you gotta love it.
Never.
Just real quick, lest we forget Wii Fit, right?
Thank
Yeah.
you. Thank you. That was going to be my next one.
Yeah, that was a very interesting. The Wii balance board. You couldn't run on it, but they had jogging in the Wii Fit game, but don't run on the balance board. You had to like lift your heels and kind of do that. But ironically, I really enjoyed running in Wii Fit because you got to go around the little island and like there were people walking their dogs and you could find the hidden Marios and it was just so endearing, but such an interesting idea. Like do yoga and try these balancing games on this weird balance board peripheral that's huge and cumbersome, but takes up a lot of space in your house. It was just such a weird idea. Like think about that. That game got made. That thing got made and it was in millions of households.
It was very popular.
Yeah.
Easier to store than the bongos, definitely. The GameCube bongos.
For sure.
yeah,
Yeah.
true.
Yeah. But like also that was a genre we haven't even talked about, fitness games. There were tons of fitness games on the Wii, even before the balance board came out, and then for sure after. I mean, hell, the Wii balance board and Wii Fit spawned a Smash Brothers character. The Wii Fit trainer is a character in a Smash Brothers video
One
game.
of my favorites, actually.
A very fun character, but like it's just astonishing to me the kinds of ways that they really tried to break outside the box. There was Wii Chess, where you move the chess pieces using the Wiimote. We talked about this with Jacob on the GameCube episode because there were a lot of GameCube games that were like this too. Nintendo used to be freaking weird.
And they're toy makers.
Yeah, the N64, GameCube, and Wii era were the weirdest era. Wii U sort of a little, but like now with the Switch, I'm grateful for the Switch. It's my favorite console, probably one of my favorite Nintendo consoles of all time because it gave me a home console and portable console in one. But as far as thinking outside the box, it is so much more boring compared to those years that we got. And it's what Geoff says. They're toy makers. They've always been toy makers. And I feel like we see less of it. There are rumors of a Switch 2 on the horizon sometime next year. I'm hoping that maybe we go back to that a little bit. But like the Wii, I think, was the last bastion of like, what if we just get freaking weird and just do whatever? And like, it didn't always work. But when it did, it was some of my favorite gaming experiences. You know, I still think nothing will ever compare to Wii Sports. I mean, they proved that. Nintendo Switch Sports came out to less than stellar fanfare, and it's because it's not just about the mini games. It's about how and when we were playing and who we were playing with.
Mm-hmm.
I think now's the time to like, let's pick our favorites. Let's play favorites.
We would like to choose.
We would like to choose. We had a ton of really great games. Again, I didn't play Metroid Prime for the first time till this year, so I didn't touch that stuff. Like major franchises here. But I think my favorite Wii game is often an underrated game that I just loved, and I'm bummed because the 3DS port is garbage. But Kirby's Epic Yarn is possibly one of the best and cutest Kirby games ever made. It's so different, but like Kirby's Epic Yarn walked so Yoshi's Woolly World could run, which is probably the best evolution of like that craft format. Because I've heard the newest one isn't as good, but like I love that game so much. For those who don't know, the reason his powers are different, it looks like yarn, it's all this different stuff, is because the second player character, Prince Fluff, was the original hero of the game and it had another name.
Yep.
It was Hal was still working on it, but like they were trying to do a new franchise. And after a while, they're like, well, what if we put Kirby in this? Maybe it'll like bring more people in. And I mean, it was a hit. It's why I bought it. What I love about it is that it's one of those games that like it could be baby's first game, but if you're an adult, there's still tons to discover. Like you don't really die. You lose gems every time you get hit, but like there's still challenge, there's still fun. And it's one of the most graphically impressive games on the Wii because it's trying to be a specific thing. It's trying to look like a specific thing instead of trying to be hyper realistic. And I think it's why it's one of the best showcases of not only the sound and design, but the graphics of the Wii.
The deliberate design definitely shows through. It's interesting because this is not the first time Nintendo has done something like this. Pokemon Snap was, this photography game isn't coming together. Put Pokemon in it. But
Yeah.
Kirby's Epic Yarn was a very popular game in my household. Sarah and I played it an awful lot, and it was just called Adorable Game, as far as we were concerned. Because there was just something so saccharine and wonderful and like warming about it, to the point where we would turn it off by going back to like the house area where you would do decorating, go into the bed, you lie down, and you start to go to sleep, and we would both just go to sleep on the bed when I turned it off. Like, and it just encouraged that kind of thing. And you're right, it's a game where it does what Kirby does very well. It's easy to beat. It's hard to complete. It's punishing to complete. And we didn't complete it. We beat everything, but we didn't get everything. And it was a very fun game.
Yeah, wonderful art direction on that one for sure. And talking about this and what you said about Mario Kart Wii, Jeff, and just Wii Sports in general, is this the most accessible console for gaming? Because you have these, even platformers, right? You have something like Kirby's Epic Yarn, and anyone can play that game and get through it. It's not meant for you to fail.
I think that was the idea. The fact that I've seen several homes where people aren't necessarily gamers, but they still have a Wii somewhere in their house. I don't know the last time they turned it on, but I think that is a testament to, yeah, that accessibility, that ease, that welcoming, that lack of gatekeeping about gaming and fun.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't even talked about Smash Brothers Brawl, which has the best
gosh,
story
yes.
mode in any Smash Brothers game. Please bring back Subspace Emissary. I want it so bad.
It was real
But
good.
like playing with the Wiimote sideways, like essentially a Nintendo controller, which that mind-blowing moment when you turned it sideways for the first time to play a Nintendo game on the Virtual Console went, oh my God, it's a Nintendo controller. It was not a great way to play it, but if you had a little brother or sister or whoever who wanted to play Smash Brothers and didn't really know how, so much easier to button mash on the sideways Wiimote than it was any of the other controller setups. And I know people who swore by that controller setup. They're all crazy, but I know tons of people who loved it. And like, I think you're right, Ryan. I think it is easily one of the most accessible gaming systems. And like, it goes all the way back to Wii Sports to like prove that. And it ended as it started.
Yeah, very much so. I've got a couple of favorites, a couple that I really enjoy. Ones that we've mentioned, Donkey Kong Country Returns and Kirby's Epic Yarn and Mario Galaxy all hold special places in my heart because of the multiplayer experiences I had with friends and with my spouse. Smash Brothers Brawl for all those same reasons. I think if I had to pick one that's a little off the beaten path that is probably my favorite or amongst them that we haven't talked about is Super Paper Mario.
Oh, sure.
Which was actually a game that I was watching trailers for it relentlessly before I got a Wii. I loved Mario RPG. I loved the Paper Mario games. And the idea of a side-scroller Paper Mario game that also had the 2D, 3D thing, that whole puzzle solving, was it as great as the trailers made me think? No, nothing could be. I thought it was going to be the greatest game ever made. Nothing was going to be that good. Was it fun? Absolutely. I love it. And I actually kind of want to go back and play it now that we're talking about it. But this is also to say there's a bunch of Wii games that I missed and I feel bad about it. I never played Xenoblade Chronicles or The Last Story, but one day I will. But I think Super Paper Mario was kind of a great Wii game for me.
Yes, I'm a Thousand Year Door fan. It's my favorite Paper Mario. I did play Super Paper Mario back when I initially had the Wii, and I loved it, but I never completed it, which I now have another copy, and I have plans to go back and complete it.
Yes.
Yeah, no, I have to, because a lot of people say it is better than Thousand Year Door. It's not an uncommon opinion to have. So
differently great.
Yeah,
Differently great.
Fair enough. Definitely seems like something I should go through and experience again.
Yeah, I remember renting that game and like just being blown away. That's the one where the mysterious Mr. L or whatever, right? With Luigi as this like
yes,
sort of
no,
kind of.
It's Mysterious Mr. L. That's not Luigi, clearly.
No, right, of course.
It's also the game where you
people.
can get a game over by refusing to take up the quest.
Yeah, it really just took the humor and brilliance of the writing of those games to the next level. I'm with you, Ryan. Thousand Year Door is my favorite, although I have a soft spot for the original Paper Mario, which I've started to replay on NSO and is just as delightful as ever. But Super Paper Mario, like the platforming segments were so cool. You could turn the camera to find hidden items. Like it used perspective in the most brilliant way. I agree, Jeff. I think it is really an underrated kind of game. I think amongst most Mario fans, but it is definitely has its lovers, and I agree. It's definitely a great one that I hope to return to someday.
So for my favorite game, I mean, obviously, like Wii Sports, right? Like, let's be real. It's probably the game I still play the most.
Real good.
But it's a game you mentioned earlier, Jeff. It's Zack and Wiki, The Quest for Barbarossa's Treasure. This is a game you don't hear a lot about, but it's very much one of those titles that now, given time, has risen to the top. It's incredible. It does have the point and click elements, but basically what the game does, it's kind of like this chibi anime style animation, and it presents you with an enclosed space, right? And it's an escape room for all intents and purposes. You have to find things in the environment to interact with, and you move your Wiimote to interact with those objects. So the example I'll give is the first room you come across, you have to cross this chasm to get to a treasure chest, right? and you have a tree in front of you. And every time you approach this tree, a centipede, big centipede, comes down, and it has like serrated edges. So you have to figure out, oh, you have a bell, right? Wiki can turn into a bell, and you could shake her and it could poof the centipede, and all of a sudden the centipede turns into a saw because it had those serrated edges. So then you use your Wiimote to saw the tree in half, it falls over the chasm, and you could go to the treasure. And it's an ever increasing difficulty of escape room like puzzles in that way as the game progresses. And it's just genius and clever. And each puzzle either has a new control mechanic or a new puzzle mechanic that you didn't see in the room before it. And it's just wonderful. It's endearing. It kind of highlights the best of the Wii without like the overblown gimmicky motion controls, in my opinion. Have either of you played this title?
A little bit, yeah.
I've not. In fact, this is the first I'm hearing of it. And like, this is the kind of thing that I think you really only got with the Wii, is like games that just, like I mentioned Mad World earlier, which unless you're a pseudo sicko like I am, you may not have heard of. And now that you've mentioned it, I've looked at some screenshots and some videos, and this would absolutely have been right up my alley had I had it on the Wii at the time, but I didn't. But like, it's definitely something that now seeing, like, I would love to go back and play. But again, I don't know that there's really any way except on the Wii.
Which is a damn shame.
It is. Ryan, thank you for joining us for this Wii retrospective.
That was good. That was good.
Retrospective. Yeah.
Retrospective. I got there. It's been a blast having you on. Again, I'm a big fan of List Off. Brian and you both rule. Doing a podcast also as Ryan and Brian. Just smart choices, right? Memorable. Love a good rhyme. But before we start to wrap up, now every time I say we during our conversation, it's like, aha, the we. But before we start to wrap up, why don't you please tell folks where they can find List Off, where they can find you, social media plugs, just pretty much the best ways to interact with y'all and go check out the pod.
Sure. I just want to say thanks so much, Matt and Geoff, for having me on. This has been a blast. We really covered all our bases here, I think.
Yeah, we really did.
Yeah, it's been an excellent conversation. And if the listeners want to go ahead and hear what I have to say about other things, you could tune into List Off with Brian and Ryan. We're available anywhere you get your podcast. We also are on Instagram, and X is what it's called now, I think.
I believe so, yes, unfortunately.
Yeah, but if you just Google List Off Podcast, I'm sure we'll come up. Thanks again for the opportunity, guys. I loved talking about this console with you.
And we'll definitely have to bring you back, maybe drag Brian along as well. Okay, so maybe it was a good idea to have Ryan being hosting, but bring you both on for something else in the future. So, listeners, we talked a lot about the Wii. We definitely didn't cover your favorite game. We never do. So please, in the comments, on the internet, wherever you go, please tell us what your favorite Wii games are. I mean, let's start there. Did you like the Wii? Did you not like the Wii? I didn't get to really talk about it that much, but I don't really like motion controls. I loved the Wii specifically, but like I hated the Sony whatever Move, whatever it was called. And the Kinect was awful. God, I hated the Kinect. But like, I still really liked the Wii because of the games that it had. But did you have favorite games? Did you like it? Did you not have one? Like, what did you think of the Wii? All of those fun things. Please interact with us. We thrive for your attention.
Yes, absolutely. Tell us why we were fools for not talking about any of the Pokemon games. We missed Battle Revolution. We missed Poke Park. You could get a Mew if you filled the thing. Come on. But it's digital only, and that's why we missed it. Tell us what your favorite games are. Tell us what your favorite Wii experiences were. Tell us what your favorite ridiculous Wii accessory was. Tell us about a game that we talked about that was a new discovery for you, because we want to have these sorts of conversations and these new discoveries together. And there's so many great ways to have these conversations and for you to reach out to us. You can find us at Fun and Games Pod on any social media we're on at the time of the recording of this episode, including Instagram, Blue Sky, X, and Tumblr. You can email us at funandgamespod@gmail.com. Let us know what you thought of this episode, what you thought of previous episodes, what you'd like us to talk about, and who you'd like us to talk with on future episodes. You can also follow along with just about everything we're putting out on our Patreon. You don't have to be a patron in order to check out a lot of what we're putting out, but we do appreciate our patrons, those who have the means, times, and emotions to support us. We'd especially like to shout out those who've gotten themselves up on the high scoreboard. Today's high scoreboard is Alex Lavelle, Case Aiken, Daniel Needon, Roger Reichart, Alejandro Alves, Curly Bright, Film It Yourself, Patrick Edwards, Rob Tremarco, Robert Proyne, and Sean Bowen. Thank you so much for your support. Please enter your initials, point the Wiimote at the TV. I really didn't do a good job of securing the sensor bar, so please be careful.
Also, as I said earlier, this retrospective, and for the foreseeable future, all future retrospectives of the console variety are going to be chosen by our patrons. You can vote by joining our Patreon at any level, $3, $5, or $10 level. There are also a ton of all other great bonuses for joining at patreon.com/funnygamespod. But again, the Wii was chosen by you, the people who paid us. And now we currently have voting up for our next retrospective, which is a decision between the PlayStation 1, PlayStation 2, the SNES, and the Sega Genesis. Please let your voices be heard. And by your voices, I mean vote for the SNES. I really want to talk about it. I'm not competitive or anything. If you want to get involved, and like I said, even if you are not a paid member, we do have a free subscription tier where you can just follow along and get notified when we post anything. We even have trial tiers, only for the $10 level at this point, because that's the level at which you get stuff to download, and it's where you get our bonus episodes every month. And so if you'd like to try out, listen to our backlog of bonus episodes, finish them all in that trial period of 7 days, you can do that. You can go check out all the content we've made within it's a lot of podcasts, but you can do it. And then if you like it, you could decide to maybe stay at the $10 level. Totally up to you. Also, of course, we have a Discord. You can join the Discord server either at certainpov.com, where a bunch of other great podcasts that we are partnered with are at, or you can look in the show notes down below. We have tons of great folks in that Discord hanging out, talking about games, comic books, TV, movies, all sorts of good stuff. It's really a great time to hang out. Mostly it's me yelling at Geoff about another indie JRPG that's coming out that I want him to play because it's our shit. Please rate and review us. You can rate us on Spotify. It just takes 30 seconds of fast forwarding through an episode to do so. I've tested it many a time on my friends' shows. Or you can go to Apple Podcasts and rate and review us there. I try and rate and review every podcast I listen to just because I know it helps. And of course, there are other platforms besides those two, but we do have those two in the show notes as they are the ones to best get us featured so more folks can find this awesome show.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for those of you that voted to make this the console we did a retrospective upon. Anyone who votes on the future console retrospectives, the next one and the ones after that, for any of your messages, your reviews, your comments, all of it is support. All of it is part of growing this community, and we couldn't do it without you. This is a conversation. Thank you for being a part of it. I'm Jeff Moonen.
And I am at AK Stormageddon.
And happy gaming.
Hey there, Screen Beans. Have you heard about Screen Snark?
Rachel, this is an ad break. They aren't Screen Beans until they listen to the show.
Fine. Potential Screen Beans. You like movies and TV shows, right?
I mean, who doesn't? Screen Snark is a casual conversation about the movies and television shows that are shaping us as we live our everyday lives.
That's right, Matt. We have a chat with at least one incredible guest every episode, hailing from all walks. We've interviewed chefs,
Writers, costumers, musicians,
yoga teachers, comedians, burlesque dancers,
folks in the film and TV industry,
and more.
We'd be delighted for you to join us every other Monday on the Certain POV Podcast Network.
Or wherever you get your podcasts, fresh and tasty off the presses.
What? But that's not.
Can I call them Screen Beans now?
Fine.
Screen Beans.
So tune in and we'll see you at the movies or on a couch somewhere.
'Cause you're all Screen Beans now.
She will be mine.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.